Daniel Hayes was the town's most respected police officer, and Laura Hayes was the picture of a devoted wife, until one secret affair set them on a collision course that would end in two disappearances, a trail of grainy photographs, and a chilling goodbye that still haunts Greenford to this day. In the quiet suburb of Greenford, Officer Daniel Hayes was the kind of man people trusted without hesitation. His calm demeanor and steady presence had earned him a solid reputation in the police department and in the community. Neighbors knew him as the officer who would help fix a flat tire, attend school charity events, and keep the streets safe even during the coldest winter nights. He had been awarded for bravery twice in his career, though he never talked much about those moments. To Daniel, service wasn't about glory, it was about doing the right thing quietly and consistently. At home, his wife Laura seemed to complete the picture. She was warm, polite, and always well put together. People often said they were the perfect couple, two hard-working individuals who supported each other without question. They had been married for 12 years, living in the same white-painted two-story house with a neat garden out front. On weekends they were often seen together, whether it was browsing at the local farmer's market, attending church, or simply sitting on their porch with cups of coffee. Their marriage looked effortless from the outside, the kind of relationship that others envied. But inside the home, life was beginning to feel different. Daniel's job required long night shifts and unexpected call-outs, sometimes leaving Laura alone for days at a time. At first, she didn't mind. She understood his duty and was proud of the work he did. But over the years, the empty evenings began to feel heavier. The sound of the ticking clock in the living room became her constant companion, and the shadows in the corners of their home seemed to grow longer in his absence. She tried to fill the loneliness with hobbies, gardening, reading, and meeting friends for coffee. But the spaces Daniel left behind could not be replaced so easily. Their conversations, once lively and full of warmth, had turned into quick updates over breakfast or tired exchanges late at night when he returned from work. Laura began to feel like her life was split into two worlds, the one where Daniel was home and the one where he wasn't. Still, she smiled when people asked about her marriage, answering without hesitation that things were good. She helped Daniel iron his uniforms, kept the house spotless, and prepared his meals just the way he liked. On some nights she would sit on the couch waiting for the sound of his car pulling into the driveway, rehearsing the stories she would tell him about her day, only for him to come in too exhausted to listen for long. Greenford was the kind of place where gossip traveled fast, and Laura knew better than to let anyone suspect her unhappiness. She kept it hidden, even from herself at times, convincing herself that this was simply what marriage looked like after many years. But deep inside, a quiet restlessness was taking root. She didn't recognize it as danger yet. To her, it was only a longing for something she couldn't quite name, a spark, a rush, a change from the predictable rhythm of her days. And in that stillness, in that carefully polished life, the first cracks began to form, too small for anyone else to see, but wide enough for temptation to slip through. Laura's restlessness found its outlet in the most ordinary of places, the local gym. She had joined at the start of spring, telling herself it was to stay healthy, to have a routine while Daniel was away on late shifts. The bright lights, the low hum of treadmills, and the constant chatter of people created a kind of background noise that distracted her from the quiet emptiness at home. That was where she first noticed Evan, the gym's new instructor. He was younger than her by a few years, confident without being overbearing, and quick with an easy smile. Their first interactions were harmless. He offered tips on posture during a workout, recommended a different set of exercises, and occasionally struck up small talk while wiping down equipment. Laura told herself it was nothing, just polite friendliness. But as the weeks passed, she began to look forward to seeing him. His compliments were subtle but warm, and he had a way of making her feel noticed in a way she hadn't felt in years. At home, she never mentioned him to Daniel, not because she felt guilty, but because it seemed unimportant. One rainy afternoon, when the gym was nearly empty, Evan suggested they grab a coffee. Laura hesitated for only a moment before agreeing. It was just coffee, she thought, something friends might do. But that coffee led to another meeting, and then another. The conversations deepened, moving from casual topics to more personal stories about their lives, their frustrations, and their dreams. She found herself sharing details about Daniel's long hours, about the loneliness she tried not to dwell on. Evan listened intently, his gaze steady and sympathetic. It didn't take long before their meetings shifted to quieter, more hidden places. A drive outside town to a little cafe where no one knew them. A walk in the park under the cover of dusk, and then, eventually, a hotel room with the curtains drawn and the air heavy with secrecy. Each time, Laura told herself she was in control, that it was only a passing distraction, that no one needed to get hurt. She believed she could keep the two parts of her life separate, the loyal wife and the woman chasing a fleeting thrill. But Laura underestimated Daniel. His years in law enforcement had made him an expert in observing details others overlooked. A misplaced gym bag in the corner of the room, a faint smell of unfamiliar cologne on Laura's scarf, the way her phone seemed to light up more often than usual. These things didn't escape him. He said nothing, but he began to watch her more closely, the same way he would track a suspect without alerting them. Laura didn't see it then, but the walls around her carefully built secret were already beginning to close in. What she thought was invisible had already been noticed, recorded quietly in Daniel's mind. And as she continued down the path she had chosen, she was unknowingly stepping into the kind of trap only a patient man like her husband could set. One evening in late summer, Laura returned home earlier than usual. The air was still warm from the day, carrying the faint scent of cut grass from the neighbor's yard. She pulled into the driveway and noticed Daniel's patrol car parked in front of the house. It was odd. His shift wasn't supposed to end for another 3 hours. The living room light glowed through the front window, casting long shadows across the lawn. Her stomach tightened, though she couldn't explain why. When she stepped inside, Daniel was seated in his usual chair, his uniform shirt still on but unbuttoned at the collar. The television was off. A half-empty mug of coffee sat on the table beside him, steam no longer rising from its surface. His expression was ageable, calm, but with a stillness that felt unnatural. Laura offered a quick smile, trying to mask her surprise at seeing him there. He didn't return it. On the coffee table, next to his mug, lay a set of car keys she didn't recognize. They were resting on a small square of paper, like they had been deliberately placed there for her to see. The keychain was distinctive, black leather with a silver emblem in the center. Her breath caught as she realized she had seen it before. It belonged to Evan. Laura's first instinct was to ask why the keys were there, but something about Daniel's silence froze the words in her throat. He leaned back in his chair, his eyes fixed on her in a way that felt heavier than anger. It wasn't an outburst, and it wasn't suspicion. It was certainty. He knew something. She felt it as clearly as if he had spoken the words aloud. She forced herself to look away from the keys, moving into the kitchen under the pretense of putting her bag down. But the moment stayed with her, clinging like the scent of smoke on fabric. The air in the house seemed different, thicker, harder to breathe. She could hear the faint creak of Daniel's chair as he shifted, but he still said nothing. All through dinner, his silence weighed on her. He asked about her day, but his questions felt mechanical, each one clipped short, leaving no space for her to elaborate. He didn't mention the keys, and she didn't dare bring them up. Her mind raced with possibilities. Had Evan been reckless? Had Daniel found him? Or had she left something behind that connected them? That night, as Daniel went about his usual routine, Laura noticed he didn't take his keys or his phone upstairs. They remained on the kitchen counter just a few inches from the unfamiliar set that now seemed to burn in her memory. She lay in bed for hours, listening to the faint sounds of him moving through the house, wondering if he was watching her even then. For the first time since her secret began, Laura felt the sharp edge of fear. She didn't know how much Daniel had seen, or how much he could prove, but she knew the man she had married never acted without purpose, and if he knew, he would be patient enough to wait until the exact moment he wanted to show her. In the days that followed, Daniel's behavior shifted in ways that were subtle but impossible to ignore. He no longer asked when Laura would be home, but he always seemed to know. His phone, once left casually on the counter or in his jacket pocket, was now always with him. Some nights he would leave without explanation, returning hours later with no smell of alcohol and no sign of where he'd been. He wasn't distant in the way angry husbands often are. There were no slammed doors, no raised voices. Instead, there was a watchfulness, a quiet precision, as if he were mapping every step she took. Laura tried to convince herself she was imagining it, but small details kept catching her attention. She noticed that her car's seat was sometimes adjusted slightly from where she had left it, as though someone taller had been driving it. Her phone battery seemed to drain more quickly than usual, though she hadn't changed her usage. And on one occasion she swore she saw a faint smudge near the latch of her glove compartment, the kind that might come from latex gloves. What she didn't know was that Daniel had already begun to gather information. His years on the force had given him access to tools and methods the average person could never imagine. Through a contact at the department, he had discreetly obtained her phone records, studying the frequency and timing of her calls. The name Evan never appeared, but the same unknown number showed up over and over, often within minutes of her leaving the house. He traced the number without logging it in any official system, making sure no one else would notice. Security cameras became his silent allies. Daniel knew which intersections had working traffic feeds, and which convenience stores kept recordings for longer than a week. A few well-placed inquiries gave him access to grainy clips of Laura's car passing by at times and locations that didn't match the errands she had mentioned. He stored the footage on a small external drive, labeling each file with the date and time. Inside the house, his methods were even more careful. He never searched her things in a way that would be obvious. Instead, he noted what was already in plain sight: the scent of a cologne that wasn't his, a receipt tucked into the side pocket of her handbag, the faint shimmer of new perfume on her wrist. Every detail was filed away in his mind, building a picture of her movements without her realizing it. To Laura, his calm demeanor became unsettling. It was as if he had stepped back from their marriage, not in neglect, but in study. He spoke less, watched more. The moments they were together felt like being under a microscope, every gesture, every glance, every pause measured. She began to feel the weight of invisible eyes on her even when she was alone. Daniel was not the kind of man to make accusations without proof. He understood patience, and patience was a weapon. In his world, cases weren't won by rushing. They were won by waiting until the suspect's own actions revealed the truth. And in his mind, Laura had already become just that, a suspect. On a warm Friday afternoon, Laura's phone buzzed with a message from Evan. He wanted to meet at their usual spot, a small roadside motel just beyond the edge of town, the kind of place where no one asked questions and the rooms smelled faintly of bleach. She hesitated for only a moment before replying. The past week had been tense at home, Daniel's quiet observation pressing down on her like a weight she couldn't shake. She needed a distraction, something to remind her she still had control over her life. She parked in the motel's cracked lot and noticed how empty it was. Only one other car sat near the far end, Evan's. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the faded parking lines, and the air carried a heavy stillness. She walked to the door of their usual room, her heels clicking softly against the concrete walkway. When she opened it, the air inside felt cooler but no less suffocating. Evan was seated on the edge of the bed, his posture stiff, his eyes locked on the floor. He didn't stand to greet her. Something about the way he avoided her gaze sent a ripple of unease through her. On the small nightstand beside him sat a plain white envelope, the kind used for official paperwork. It was unsealed, its flap resting loosely over the top. Without a word, Evan nudged the envelope toward her. Laura reached for it, her fingers trembling slightly as she slid out the contents. Inside were photographs, grainy, time-stamped, and unmistakable. In one, she and Evan were standing too close together in the gym parking lot, his hand resting lightly at her waist. In another, they were in his car, faces turned toward each other in a way that could only be interpreted one way. There were even shots from inside the motel, the angles suggesting a camera had been placed somewhere hidden. Her chest tightened, and the sound of her own heartbeat filled her ears. She turned the photos over, hoping for some explanation, but the backs were blank. Whoever had taken them knew exactly what they were doing. The timestamps revealed a chilling truth. These moments had been captured over several weeks, not all at once. It meant someone had been watching them for a long time. Laura's mind spun, searching for possibilities, but there was only one that made sense. Daniel. The precision, the patience, the knowledge of where she would be, it fit him too perfectly. The realization struck her like a blow. If he had gone this far, what else had he done? What else had he found? Evan finally looked at her then, his expression pale and strained. He didn't speak, but his eyes said enough. They were both in over their heads. The room seemed smaller now, the air heavier, as if the walls themselves were leaning in. Laura clutched the photos to her chest, unable to decide if they were a warning, a threat, or the beginning of something far worse. The next morning, Laura woke to an uneasy silence. The side of the bed where Daniel usually slept was empty, the sheets already cool. She padded downstairs, half expecting to find him in the kitchen, but the house was still, no coffee brewing, no sound of movement, no sign he had been there at all. The photos from the motel were still hidden in the back of her dresser drawer, yet their presence weighed on her as heavily as if she were still holding them. She decided to call Evan, needing answers, but his phone went straight to voicemail. She tried again an hour later. Still nothing. By midday she drove to his apartment, a small one-bedroom above a hardware store on the other side of town. The blinds were drawn, the mailbox stuffed with envelopes and flyers. When she knocked, there was no answer. She waited, glancing up and down the street, but no familiar figure appeared. Later, she stopped by the gym. One of the other trainers told her Evan had left suddenly. No notice given, no explanation. He had texted the owner late the previous night saying he wouldn't be returning. No one had seen him since. The casual tone in the trainer's voice didn't match the knot forming in Laura's stomach. Evan wasn't the kind of man to simply vanish without telling her. On her drive home she caught herself scanning the roadsides, half expecting to see his car pulled over somewhere. Every shadow between the trees, every abandoned lot seemed suddenly suspicious. Her mind returned to the rumors she'd overheard at the diner 2 months earlier, about a man found near the old quarry under mysterious circumstances. The details had been vague, the kind of small-town gossip that faded quickly. But now those whispers seemed sharper, closer. That evening, Daniel returned home as if nothing were unusual. He moved through the house with his usual deliberate calm, hanging up his jacket, checking the mail, adjusting the clock in the kitchen. Laura watched him from the doorway, her pulse quickening. He asked nothing about her day, and she didn't dare ask about his. The silence between them had grown into something with weight, something that pressed in on her from all sides. Over the next few days, the emptiness where Evan should have been began to feel permanent. His phone remained off, his social media accounts untouched. Laura searched his name online, finding nothing new, no police report, no missing person notice. It was as if he had been erased. At night she lay awake listening to the faintest sounds, the creak of the stairs, the hum of the refrigerator, the distant bark of a dog. But sometimes she heard something else, the slow, steady crunch of footsteps outside, fading into the darkness. Each time, she told herself it was just her imagination, yet deep down, she knew the truth. People didn't just disappear without reason. And if Daniel had been the reason, she might never learn exactly what had happened to Evan, or where he was now. Days passed in a blur of tension and quiet dread. Laura moved through the house like a guest in someone else's life, careful not to disturb the stillness that seemed to have settled over everything. Daniel's presence was no longer constant, but when he was home, it was impossible to ignore. He didn't raise his voice or ask probing questions, he simply watched. That watchfulness had become almost unbearable, a constant reminder that he knew more than he let on. On a Wednesday evening, Laura returned from the grocery store to find the house darker than usual. The only light came from a small lamp in the kitchen, casting long, soft shadows across the counter. There, right in the center, lay her wedding ring. It was placed carefully on a folded sheet of paper, its gold band catching the glow of the lamp. Beside it sat a small, clear evidence bag. Inside were the same photographs she had hidden away after the motel, only now they were neatly arranged, each one visible through the plastic as if prepared for a case file. She didn't move at first, her mind scrambling to understand what she was seeing. The ring, the note, the photos. It wasn't just proof that Daniel knew, it was a message. Slowly, she stepped closer and unfolded the paper. 4 words were written in Daniel's precise, steady handwriting. "I know, goodbye." The words struck harder than any confrontation could have. They were final, unyielding, not an invitation for explanation or apology. Her hands shook as she set the paper back down. The air in the house felt heavy, suffocating. She called out his name, but her voice seemed to vanish into the quiet. She searched the rooms one by one, her footsteps echoing against the walls. The bedroom closet was half empty, his uniforms gone, along with his off-duty clothes. The drawers that had held his belongings were bare, save for a few forgotten receipts and an old watch he never wore. In the garage, the empty space where his patrol car had been yawned like an open wound. A neighbor later told her they had seen Daniel's car earlier that evening, parked on a dirt road that cut into the woods beyond town. They'd watched him get out and disappear into the trees, his silhouette fading until it was swallowed by the dark. No one had seen him return. That night, Laura sat alone in the kitchen with the ring in her palm, the photographs spread out before her. Outside, the wind moved through the trees, making the branches tap against the window like quiet knocks. She couldn't tell if it was the house settling, or something else, something deliberate. Every creak, every faint sound from the yard, felt like it could be him, just out of sight. The note's message lingered in her mind, more ominous with each passing hour. Daniel wasn't the type who'd leave things unfinished. If he had truly gone, it was only because he had already decided what should happen next. And she feared that whatever he had in mind wasn't over yet. Weeks turned into months and still there was no sign of Daniel or Evan. The official channels gave Laura nothing. No missing person reports filed in Daniel's name. No investigation into Evan's sudden absence. The police department released a vague statement about Daniel taking extended leave, but no one could say where he had gone. It was as if both men had stepped off the edge of the world, leaving only silence behind. Laura stayed in the house, though every creak of the floorboards and every flicker of shadow seemed to tull at her nerves. She avoided the rooms Daniel had used most often, as if stepping into them might invite him back in some unseen way. At night, she sometimes woke to the faint sound of gravel shifting outside, like slow, deliberate footsteps. She would lie still, barely breathing, straining to hear more, but the sound always faded before she could be certain it was real. The town of Greenford didn't forget. Whispers followed her in the grocery store aisles, and at the post office counter. People spoke in hushed tones about the Hayes affair, and speculated on what might have happened. Some believed Daniel had gone off in shame, unable to face the truth. Others, with darker imaginations, hinted at a more permanent solution, one that explained why Evan had vanished at the same time. Laura learned to keep her head down, to act as though she didn't hear. She tried to rebuild her routines. She cleaned the garden, replaced curtains, and rearranged furniture, but the changes felt superficial, as though the house itself resisted forgetting. Certain drawers still smelled faintly of his cologne, and the faint outline of his boots remained by the back door no matter how many times she scrubbed the floor. Sometimes she caught herself glancing at the kitchen counter where the ring and the note had once been, expecting to find them there again. She wondered if Daniel was watching her somewhere far away, or if he was much closer than she dared imagine. The thought brought both comfort and fear. Comfort that he might still care enough to keep an eye on her, fear that he might still be deciding what to do. One autumn evening, As the sun dipped low and the wind carried the smell of wood smoke through the air, she noticed something unsettling. In the far corner of her backyard, just beyond the reach of the porch light, the grass was disturbed, as if someone had stood there recently. A faint impression of boot prints marked the soil, the pattern strangely familiar. She stared at them until the last of the light faded, her heart pounding with a mix of recognition and dread. Laura never told anyone about the footprints. She didn't need to. In her mind, they confirmed what she had always suspected, that Daniel hadn't left completely. He was out there, in the shadows, unseen but never far. And as the days shortened and the nights grew colder, she lived with the quiet certainty that one day, when he chose, he would step back into her life, not for reconciliation, not for closure, but for whatever ending he had been waiting for all along.